now. Let's get Dr. Greer on. We're actually calling him live.
That's
air.
right. I like this live real-time action.
Dr. Stephen Greer. Dr. Greer, welcome to the show. Third Phase of Moon Radio.
Welcome to the show, Dr. Greer. This is Blake Cousins, and it's always good to have you back on Third Phase of Moon. The viewers are fascinated by your knowledge, the Atacama alien, this contact in the desert. We're almost up to giving $5,000 of free tickets to the show, thanks to you, and everybody's excited to show up at the Joshua Tree. I know last year's event was quite incredible. There was a person right here in Hawaii named Reynolds Kamaka Vivioli. He's a kahuna. He claims he has contact with the star family, and he predicted that night there would be a major triangle formation that was going to show up over the Joshua Tree. And we put it out on Third Phase, and people claim that it really did show up the night you were there. Did you witness the triangle UFO, Dr. Greer?
Yeah, we did. And in fact, it's interesting. We did a similar thing in Arizona a few years earlier, and a very beautiful tetrahedral craft partially materialized. We got a photograph of it. I believe it's on our website, SiriusDisclosure.com, under the heading. If you go to, there's ET evidence, and then there's also CE5. But we have, a number of images. I'm pretty sure that one is up there. Certainly, it's in our collection. And what happened is that there was a couple hundred people out under the stars on this roof kind of terrace, and this same object, which is very, in two dimensions, it would look like a triangle, but you could actually see that it was turned, so you could see that it was a tetrahedron, which, by the way, for those of you who don't know, a tetrahedron is four triangles. It's an equilateral triangle on each of three sides, and they make a triangular base. But, of course, if you don't have an up and down coordinate, it's just basically four triangular sides. And these shaped craft have been seen, of course, for, I think, millennia. But we have had that happen. And sometimes they will be fully in this dimension, invisible. Sometimes they'll only be visible with a good night scope. And other times you'll only see part of it. You'll see an edge of it. In fact, when we were in, where were we? Also in Arizona a couple months ago, we had one of these appear, but what you saw of it was like 2 points of light that were moving together, and as it moved, or area around it blocked out the other stars. And so the only part of it that could you see with the naked eye were these 2 points of light, but very large, moving right over the sky above us. And we actually had some amazing video of this type of event happening during these contact events. And just so people know, a CE5 is when humans set up the conditions and invite contact, as opposed to something that's an accidental sighting or what have you. So it's sort of a diplomatic initiative where we are welcoming them here within the aspect of the oneness that's within us, which is consciousness and universality of mind. And that, we think, is the foundation for a future of universal peace. So in that sort of ethical and philosophical construct, we do these protocols, and it's amazing how often we have these sort of things seen.
Doctor, go ahead, Blake.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. J. The connection between man and alien is quite profound, especially when the kahuna was here in Hawaii. You were over there in California at the Joshua Tree, and the prediction was there. This connection, I think, is global, like you've been saying. But what about, we're working on a movie, Dr. Greer, it's called Hangar 52, and we're basing it on knowledge that we received from the people in regards to abductions, the sightings, free energy. Is there a government cover-up? Is there a dark force? And we're thinking that is the government controlled by a dark alien race?
No, absolutely not. However, of course, it makes for a great conspiracy theory, and I think that there's so much information that I think is disinformation out there on this subject. Now, are there aspects of the government that are incredibly dark? Yes, but why do they need to be controlled by an ET civilization? It's sort of I think it's the cop-out that people come up with not to take responsibility for our own failings and shortcomings as human beings. And humans have been doing horrific things and dominating each other and engaging in warfare for way too long. And I just think it's a bridge too far to say that, oh, this is because there's some force. Now, you can define perhaps evil as this kind of behavior, and if you want to look at it that way, but to say that it's extraterrestrial is, I think, really, there's no basis for that at all. However, I think there are people ironically within the government programs who want people to believe that, because there's no way to, how do you prop up a multi-trillion-dollar military-industrial complex worldwide? And we're spending $1 trillion in the United States alone, if you all in with intelligence programs, homeland security, black budgets, the Pentagon. How do you keep that kind of spending afoot if you don't somehow concoct a bigger enemy than, say, terrorism? And Leon Panetta, who I put a briefing together for him when he was the CIA director for Obama, his first CIA director, and he at one point he said, look, we're spending over $100 billion a year chasing 70 Al Qaeda members in the desert of Pakistan and Afghanistan, and how do you grow this sort of juggernaut and justify this kind of expenditure, which is of course impoverishing the world tremendously, without having a new enemy? And this is what Carol Rosin and Werner von Braun, the guy who invented the rocket for Adolf Hitler, told Carol Rosin on his deathbed, that basically that they were absolutely concocting events and trying to brainwash the public that there would be a threat from outer space, even if it's only one or two species that we should then unite against, like the movie Independence Day, so we can, quote, kick alien butt, quoting Will Smith in that movie. And, I've spoken to too many people in the intelligence community, as well as Hollywood, who know that that's the agenda. But unfortunately, the UFO and New Age subculture have taken this stuff hook, line, and sinker, and in my sense, it's really a tragedy of brainwashing.
I wanted to ask you also, with Hangar 52, we are trying to showcase the good side of humanity, and like you said, there is a dark and evil side of it as well. There's an equal point in the middle, and I guess that's the way it's going to go on forever, but we are trying to put a good light on things. But we also want to delve into, in the movie Majestic 12, Dr. Greer, does it exist?
Well, it's had various names since the 40s, and, does that name still be the one? Would that still be the one that's current? I seriously doubt it. Was there a group, really it's Majesty and Magic in some documents I have that are as recent as the 90s and the 2000s? Yes, it has existed, and basically it's a committee, not just American, that has maintained the secrecy and the counterintelligence programs. Now, the disinformation and counterintelligence programs is a big part of it. And the people that I've met with over the years, and I have over 550 people who worked in classified projects have dealt with this subject. And if you go to our website, we have several dozen that are actually on videotape talking. But for every one that's on our website, there are at least 10 that won't go onto an interview that I personally have met with. And what you find as you put this mosaic together is it's a whole complex picture you have to put together carefully, is that so much of the information on this subject has been, quote-unquote, leaked by the intelligence community, but it's really pre-positioned disinformation that's designed to have a certain effect. One effect is to discredit the subject because it's just so ridiculous. The other, however, is actually to manipulate people with fear. And if you look at it, if you look at how demagogues, whether it's been religious leaders or political leaders or different kinds of entities over the last several thousand years of human history, is that one of the chief ways that humans have been able to be manipulated is to make them afraid of something that's, quote, other. So, for many, many years, it was one, race or one ethnic group. It's still today all over the world. Look at the Middle East, one religious group against another. It may be one ethnic group. If you go to Africa, there are tribal groups. And, Rwanda, you had the Tutsis and the Hutus. That, some like 800,000 people were butchered, a decade or two ago. And what you see with that is that there's a tendency for people to hate and be afraid of anything that's really different from them, and even if it's not very different. I mean, if you look for years in Ireland, you had Protestants and Catholics. Okay, here they're all Christian. They're white. They're living on this little island, and they're blowing each other up like there's no tomorrow. So the problem with that is that people who are trying to get a lot of centralized power know that they can do that if they can set the populace against each other and play them off each other. And, there was an amazing book written some years ago about how in New Zealand, the colonialists turned one peaceful native tribe against another so that they would enter into warfare, so that they would be weakened, so the colonialists could then dominate the entire area. And that kind of Machiavellian, very deceptive action is really what goes on. What's unfortunate is that the UFO subculture has become the chief vector or vehicle, you might look at it, for a lot of this terrifying information to come out, so that there'll be people in a camp of, there are good ones and there are bad ones, and we're going to choose sides, and it's Star Wars all over again. I mean, this is like, a wet dream, I hate to say that, for the intelligence community to have people, brainwashed this way. And what I think that, when I met years ago, I got a document. It's in the film very briefly, Sirius, which you can see at our website, SIRIUS is the name of the film, and it came out last year as the biggest crowdfunded film in history. And what happened is, in this document, although they didn't spend much time on it in the movie, I would have liked to spend more time, is that it was from the Strategic Studies Institute, and it was talking, this is 1996, about creating a global abduction cult and to simulate human being abducted by aliens that would be done with very advanced aircraft and the stagecraft of creatures that look like aliens but aren't. And, this document is in black and white, and it's an authentic document describing this program. Now, if that's all there was, I'd say, well, that's interesting. But then I've met with so many men and women who've been in these projects. I remember talking to a man who had been in a program back in the 70s. It was the late 60s and 70s where they were doing this. And he says, oh, yeah, back then we didn't have as good a stagecraft, as they called it, as we do now. But we were able to get these anti-gravity devices and have people appear to be aliens. And they would use various chemical substances, electromagnetic weapons, and they would engage in various types of abductions and also mutilation events back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and for livestock. And he says we were doing that because we knew that that would make its way into the tabloid media and the UFO subculture and begin to start this slowly snowballing effect of fearing everything alien. So that's sort of how the game is played. It's been played for thousands of years by despotic demagogues, whether they be religious figures or political figures. And there's always an agenda behind it. The agenda behind it is to manipulate people through fear. And I think that, one of the big challenges of this era right now is for people to transcend and see through that. And it's like the old Who song, we won't be fooled again. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people have been fooled. And the idea that these programs aren't very well funded and extremely sophisticated in the technologies they have, it's just a wrong idea. They are well funded, albeit illegally, and they are very sophisticated in the technologies they have, and also in the ability they have to stage something and fool people. So I think you have to view so much of this with an eye of, it's sort of like, is it real or Memorex? The old commercial years ago about the audio tapes. Is it actually an ET event, or is it something masquerading as ET or alien for the purpose of psychological warfare, like the Benowitz case that everyone probably knows about, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations case back in the day in the near Sandia National Laboratories in Kirkland Air Force Base, where they really did stage not only a human abduction, but a whole series of things and documents to put people off the course. Now, what a lot of people don't know is what they were really trying to hide, aside from putting out the false information, is that there was a woman that Paul Benowitz knew that had actually seen near Kirkland and Sandia a man-made anti-gravity propulsion device that looks like a UFO. And in order to sort of brainwash her into thinking that was not ours but alien, they set up this whole series of things that Richard Doty and others were involved in. And I think that this is a real problem because, you can't take things at face value, and when you do, you're going to find that you're just being played by some very sophisticated people who have a lot of experience manipulating mass markets and mass media and subcultures into a certain type of reactive or reactionary perspective. And I'd say, well, you can never prove a negative, so you can never prove that there are no civilizations out there that may not have our best interest at heart. But let's say even if that were true, what's your response going to be? Is your response going to be more war, i.e. Star Wars, interplanetary systems that are going into war? Well, if you understand technologies that are these scalar electromagnetic weapon systems, you can take out an entire planet with a system like that. So if hydrogen bombs and atomic bombs would leave the world uninhabitable, these systems are even worse than that. So there is only one path forward, and it's peace. And it's not as exciting as a horror film about aliens. It's not as titillating about finding a new group of people. You can't overtly be a racist, and you can't overtly hate women, or you can't. Now they're wanting to find a way that people can overtly hate something. Well, what's the next something? Well, it's another system out there, another star system that we have to hate. It's a very convenient thing. It's tragic, but it plays into this sort of collective experience of humanity in our recorded history of ethnic groups, religious groups, political groups going to battle, going to war. And you look at the last 100 years, we've killed something like 200 million of our own species in warfare on this planet, and often for things that are just ridiculous. And yet that's something that is, unfortunately, one of the chief organizing principles of the current world order is an us versus them military, industrial, centralized governmental complex. And if they really want to be able to take that to the next level, they've got to find another enemy. So this is, I think, what's really deeply behind so much of the information that tends to scare people and turn people into these sort of dualistic camps of us versus them.
Now, Dr. Greer, we are an extremely primitive species with this tribal warfare. Like you just said, these 200 million people that were killed. And obviously the next step in evolution is people need to realize that, we are the same because there's others out there. And isn't there some sort of federation, galactic federation out there that's awaiting us to ask them? Or are they waiting for us to have peace?
There is. I mean, there's a very large network of interstellar civilizations that have been observing our development for a very, very long time. Now, my view on this, stepping back and looking at the last, say, 100,000 years, most of which isn't recorded, it's been a process of humans going from tribes to city-states, Greece and the Trojans, and then going to nations and nation building, and now to something resembling of an interconnected global society, although highly dysfunctional. And then the next step, obviously, would be to become interglobal, interplanetary. However, that ticket, to get to that next stage, the requirement is that you have become at least nominally civilized so that you're not murdering each other by the millions. We haven't made that leap yet. So unfortunately, our technology has advanced enormously, from, muskets and cannons and things of this sort in the 1800s and 1700s to thermonuclear weapons and things that are classified weapons that are even more fearsome, as well as technologies that are very, very advanced. So we have developed technologies ahead of our social and spiritual development, and that is exactly the window. That's exactly the period when a species such as ours is at greatest risk, not only to ourselves, but I know I sound like a doctor here, but not only dangerous to ourselves, but dangerous to others. Now, interestingly, if someone comes into my emergency department, I'm an emergency doctor by training, who's a danger to himself or others, they get committed to a mental facility. And, I had a friend who was a Harvard psychologist. He was hilarious, and he had had an encounter outside Washington that was amazing. And he said to me, he says, yes, well, the Earth right now is the intergalactic insane asylum because we're acting completely like a bunch of crazy people. And I said, yeah, I know. So, one of the things is we have to become nominally sane. And it's not that we're going to all become perfect or enlightened. I'm not, and I doubt anyone listening is. However, we can at least stop murdering each other by the millions and setting up these systems that are designed to manipulate people into larger and larger and more expensive battles. And I think that's something that can only be changed by the people, because there's so much power that is centered at the top of this food chain of exactly what Eisenhower warned us about, the military-industrial complex, which is now the military-industrial financial laboratory research complex. And at the deepest levels of it are folks who really do want to be able to maintain control over not just American or British population, but a global population by presenting an existential threat that is not human. And I think that drives so much of the agenda of the false information, the concocted cases, the stagecraft. Now, have there been people who have been horrible victims of this? Yes. And, a lot of people, when they've heard me say this, say, well, you're not very sympathetic to people who've been injured or abducted. I said, no, I'm very sympathetic. Where I differ is the conclusion of who's doing it and what's behind it. There was a physicist who used to work out at Pine Gap, the facility near Alice Springs in the center of the continent of Australia, and brilliant man. And he was talking to me about how they had been manufacturing for years these creatures that look like aliens, but they're actually man-made kind of bio-nanotechnology creatures that have been used in abductions and have really been very persuasive for a lot of people thinking that they had an encounter with an alien when it was actually something that people were making that was some excellent stagecraft. And I say excellent in the sense of very well done, but diabolical and absolutely evil. And so I think that, until you get do a really good research on this and begin to drill down that, since the 80s there have been people who have concluded that, it's not just MK Ultra at the CIA that was doing experiments on people. There are all kinds of experiments that have been done with some technologies that most people wouldn't believe humans have. But it's because they're assuming that the technologies they know about, such as might be at MIT or Caltech or Oxford or Cambridge, that's the state of the art. It is not the state of the art. The state of the art of the technologies are unpublished in deep black projects that are in these underground facilities near Edwards and the Nellis Range, what people call Area 51, but nobody in the business calls it that. And these technologies that are in the hands of the big corporate titans, such as Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman and SAIC and E-Systems and Raytheon and on and on and on. Those technologies are highly classified and are, most people, if they were to see them displayed, would say, oh, that's got to be alien. Well, it's not. It's just that they don't know how far these technologies over the last 50 years of studying, not just science in general, but also recovered and downed ET craft, have advanced, and they are substantial. So this substantial growth in technology that's classified and is not known by the general public would almost certainly fool anyone who would see it. I remember back in the early 90s, it was after I briefed the CIA director for Bill Clinton, I had a man pull me aside. He says, we have technologies that are so good that if we want to have somebody have a conversation with their personal God, a Jesus, a Buddha, whoever, they'll have it, they will think it's real, and they will pass a lie detector test that it happened to them. He looked at me square in the eye. This guy, it was chilling. And I said, what are you talking about? At that time, I thought this has got to be nonsense. And he went through a lot of this, and I went, oh, my God. I mean, and this is why, research on this issue is not simple. It's like an onion you pull back, and you pull back 38 layers, and you think you've reached the core of it, and you've got 50 more to pull back. So it's a not a simple issue.
Let me ask you this, Dr. Greer. You're saying that the technology is so superior right now that they can mimic an alien abduction, mimic UFO flights and anti-gravity and this. But when you're doing your summoning events and having your CE5, could this be possible again, technology that might be man-made and you might be, being deceived again?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, we've had both happen on the same week-long training event. But by the way, I just want to mention to people, there are 2 spots still available for the week after the Joshua Tree event. We're going to do the thing that Sunday night's open to the public. Then we're going to do a small team training for an entire week up in Joshua Tree that begins that night and goes for an entire week to the following Sunday morning. And that's limited to, I think, about 25 people. But there are 2 spots left, so if anyone has that week and wants to do it, they can go to SeriousDisclosure.com and find out. But we have had that happen. I'll give you a great example. One time we were up in you probably know where Sedona, Arizona is, and we were up in that area, and we had an amazing sighting and contact with actual ET craft and these translucent beings that were around us, very ET. The craft were seamless, this and that. And then later, we had a disc fly over, but it had 2 jet fighters escorting it that was 100% man-made. It was a man-made anti-grav that was going from the south to the north. I suspect it was headed up towards the Provo area, the Dugway Proving Grounds, which is an underground area there south of Provo. That's one of the state-of-the-art facilities now in America. Most people don't know about. They always think of Area 51. I say, yeah, that was a cool place in the 60s and 70s. But so this event, everyone there are like 30, 40 people there, looked up and they, what the hell is this? I said, well, that's one of ours. So, yeah, I think people have to have enough knowledge, and I think this is one of the things that I try to train people when I do these expeditions with them is to say, look, here's the characteristics of an actual interstellar transdimensional extraterrestrial vehicle and these beings. Here's what we have that I know about that are classified projects. There are distinguishing characteristics. Now, if it's too far away and there's not enough information, you have to say, well, gee, I don't know if that was one of ours or one of theirs. And I think that, but if you don't even have that, in medicine we talk about differential diagnosis, so that if somebody has chest pain, there are like 115 things that can be. One of them is a heart attack. But if you don't know about the other 114 other things, you're going to miss a dissecting thoracic aneurysm, which is, of course, what killed Princess Diana. So you have got to have enough knowledge and information. What I find is sort of difficult in the UFO subculture is that people aren't drilling down at the depth that they need to, because the people studying new energy and anti-gravity and secret aircraft programs don't give much. Some of them don't even think any of it's ET. A lot of the people involved with the ET and so-called alien issue don't know about the other. You really have to put all of it together in a comprehensive bit of information, and this is what I've been trying to bring forward. It's difficult because people want simplistic answers, but it ain't simple. If it were simple, this problem would have been solved before I was born in the 50s. So I think that's why we as a people have to begin to say, this has got to be childhood Zen now. We have to have a mature understanding of this issue, but not only in terms of how interstellar civilizations might appear in our time and space and how we might make contact with them, but what are the capabilities within the deep black programs at the Lockheed Skunk Works inside what's called the Cube, the big underground cube area near Edwards Air Force Base. What are the capabilities within, out at Pine Gap in Australia? What are the capabilities that are electromagnetic weapon systems or systems that could simulate an event? You have to know all of this in order to actually go out there and understand what's happening. And if you don't have that comprehensive amount of information, it's like a blind man holding on to an elephant, and you may be holding on to the back end of it. So I think it's a complicated issue. It's not insurmountable, but one can't take a facile, and it's not a trivial issue to get all this information around into a comprehensive paradigm. And that's what I didn't know 24 years ago when I started the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence and the Worldwide Disclosure Movement. I knew about some of this, but between 1990 and the year 1998 or so, I went through a very steep learning curve from people who were on the inside of these projects. I mean, as you know, I have an uncle who was Northrop Grumman and worked on the lunar module, the thing that put the first man on the moon. So I had a lot of contacts. When I began to learn what our capabilities were that were classified, that are 100% human, I went, oh my God, this is a really complex issue. It's not as simple as people think.
So when I know Dr. J, and we have some guests on the line that want to get some questions into you, Dr. Greer, like Johnny Webb all the way from the UK, but I wanted to get this in. The false flag event, is it on or off the table by the powers that may be? A major invasion, CNN posted, and then there it is. Everybody knows that here's the extraterrestrial. We know we're not alone. Is this on the table, off the table, and how are you going to know if it's not legitimate, if it's one of ours or if it's the real deal?
Well, first of all, interstellar civilizations have no need to invade here. I mean, I think, with all due respect to Zachariah Sitchin and others, no civilization needs to come here to get anything we have here. We don't need to be turned into slaves digging up gold. If you understand the technologies of interstellar travel, you can materialize any element, any material you want through resonance field frequencies, and I can get into this later if you want to talk about it. So this is not something that, there's no real reason to come here. And by the way, they estimate there are 11 billion Earth-like planets in our own galaxy, the Milky Way, which is one of billions of galaxies. So anything that's here on this planet is abundant throughout the universe. So there's no need, if you can travel from one star system in one point in space-time to another by going beyond the speed of light through these other dimensions, there's no reason that there'd be that kind of an event that would be for their own self-interest, number one. Number two, what you ask about this false flag event, what people haven't understood about what I'm talking about is that event has been going on for 50 years. In other words, since Eisenhower lost control of these covert projects in the 50s, they have been putting out disinformation that has been tailored to create within the Hollywood, science fiction, and UFO subcultures this sort of aura of fear and of alien invasion and fearing all things alien. And I think this is something that people don't understand. It's a long-term project. So like Werner von Braun, when he was talking about this, he was talking about it, in 1974. That was 40 years ago. So it isn't like this is something that's just like a singular event that's going to happen. It's an ongoing disinformation and counterintelligence project that all of us have been victims of. That's
Are they going to get it on a world scale, though, like CNN all at once? Is that on the table, or
Sure, that's something that I would say that's something that's possible in the future, and I think people would have to be very, very careful about how they evaluate what's going on. I mean, I wish we had been so careful about the claims about the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq before we went up and completely dissembled that country. And look what we have now, probably what's going to become the biggest terrorist and radical state in the entire world, much worse than Afghanistan. So I think that what people have to begin to do is they need to question this. And if it's on CNN or any other major network, you really need to question it. I hate to say it, because, those guys are often just basically taking dictation from the right hand of the king. And I'm quoting, that what I just said, taking dictation from the right hand of the king, is what a very good friend of Mike Wallace at 60 Minutes told me up in New York back in the 90s, a guy named Schwartz. And Schwartz, this guy told me, he said, look, he says, I used to think we had a free press. He says, and he had been dealing with Mike Wallace on some of this stuff, dealing with these majestic documents and other things way back in the 80s and 90s. He says, what I found is that basically the big media cannot cover and will only portray things that they are ordered to do because they're corporatized. And those big media corporations are vertically and horizontally integrated into the system. So, I think that something certainly could be done like that. Now, the other issue is that you can have an authentic ET event, and it could be spun into something that is an invasion. For example, I'll give you a great example. Back during the darkest days of the Cold War, as you know from the Disclosure Project witnesses, many of our intercontinental ballistic missile, our nuclear missile silos and facilities were overflown by ET craft. A number of cases where, like in Minot, North Dakota, where you had 16 to 20 intercontinental ballistic missiles, thermonuclear weapons, that were rendered unlaunchable all at the same time. Now, at the same time, the same era when that was happening, I remember talking to Sam Donaldson of ABC News about this, that was going on in the Soviet Union with their nuclear weapons, but in a different way. And basically, what a captain who was there in the Air Force at Minot, North Dakota, said, he really felt that the ETs were saying, don't blow up this beautiful planet. But if you do launch, know this, we can intervene so you don't destroy all life on Earth, because this Earth is precious. He really got that vibe. And I said, well, of course that's what they were saying. If they wanted to come in and just invade and sanitize the whole Earth of all this stuff, they could do that probably in a couple of nanoseconds. The problem is that would look like an invasion. So it's sort of a catch-22. They're waiting for us to fix this problem, because if it's done from outside, number one, we're not going to learn any lessons and evolve. And number two, it will be portrayed by these special interests as an invasion when it isn't, when they're simply trying to help or prevent something disastrous. So I think we have to look at this in a much wiser way than the paranoiac and sensationalism that permeates this issue right now. And that's one of the more difficult things for people to accept, because to be thoughtful about this is really difficult, and to be reactionary is predictable but cliche.
Dr. Greer, we got a break in a couple minutes, but real quick, I wanted to give Blake any last words before he goes.
Well, certainly, we're going to be getting on location and working on our latest production. It's a feature-length film. Everybody keep an eye out for it, Hangar 52. And, yeah, Dr. Greer, I think you're going to dig what you're going to see in this film. Maybe you don't quite know the angle we're going to go at it, but definitely it's not a horror movie, but it is a thrill ride, and it's inspirational for humanity. Do you think there's good people in power that, they're looking out for the human race, and that's why everything's still together? Everything's not falling apart yet. Are they still in control?
Well, control is a very big word. I would say there are certainly good people in all walks of life who want us to make it through this challenge. And, a few months ago, I was on an island out off the coast of Australia with 120 leaders from around the world. And, there were at least 10 or 20% of those people who were very enlightened, very concerned about the public. The organizers of this event, which is sort of a more elite thing like Davos or the World Economic Forum, are enormously supportive of what we're trying to do with the CE5 initiative and disclosure and bringing out these technologies for peaceful use. And these were some of the most powerful and connected people in the world. Now, with that said, there were probably half the people who were there who I thought were going to hurl me into the Coral Sea in the Great Barrier Reef and drown me before I got off that island. The hate stares were, and oh my God, I mean, it was painful actually. But I'm used to that. I mean, I'm used to being the person people love to hate. But I think that
we're going to go to break. Everybody stand by. We have Dr. Greer, the man himself. Stay tuned. Third Phase Moon. We'll be right back. Exciting interview so far with the world famous Dr. Greer, and we're going to be asking him about the Atacama alien. Because, go ahead, John.
I was going to say, we're going to bring him right back. You let me know when we're bringing him right back. But we need to announce the winner of the contest. The winner, yes. Did you want to do the honors of what I sent you?
You go ahead, Dr. J.
The winner of this week's ticket, remember, all tickets valued are $5,000. We are giving them here exclusively through Third Phase of Moon and on Revolution Radio. And the winner this week is Stephen Einpar. Again, Stephen Einpar, if you are out there listening, call in or you watch for an email from Blake Cousins and of course the Contact in the Desert people. If you want to be next week's winner and every winner we have every Thursday this month, go to contactinthedesert.com/Third Phase of the Moon. Exclusive contest. Blake,
congratulations, Stephen. And if you're out there at Contact in the Desert, Joshua Tree, the event, Dr. Greer will be there. They'll be doing the CS5, communicating with the extraterrestrials. And if you capture anything amazing, send it to Third Phase of the Moon via Skype or Facebook. We'd love to share it to the world. And we're working on this exclusive movie, Hangar 52, in regards to the UFO abduction phenomenon, world government conspiracies about covering up technology. That could save the world, make energy free all around the world. Things could change. But we also wanted to get Dr. Greer on. Ring him up, Dr. J, because we wanted to ask him some incredible questions about the Atacama alien. And it's going to be incredible hour or two coming up because
absolutely.
Only right here at Third Phase Moon.
I'm going to give him the chance to finish about the cabal. Dr. Greer, welcome back. We are live on Revolution Radio. And right before we went to break, you were cut off. Sorry, when the music comes on, the show is on break and over.
No problem.
You were talking about, the cabal. And I wanted to ask you, finishing with what you were saying, what can we do to dethrone these people that are controlling us, and as you were explaining, the false people that are creating the false flags?
Well, I think that we have to just create another reality. In other words, if you take on a center of power like that, you're giving in and giving them more power. So if you do it directly, what you do is, while not totally ignoring them, you go forward with a positive initiative and do it notwithstanding their existence. And this is a sort of a strategic aikido that really will work. And of course, that if you look at the history of Gandhi or Martin Luther King, the civil rights movement, many things, that's basically what they did. They did not go and attack, directly in some sort of confrontational conflict, the British in India. But they came together as a people and asserted that they wanted to have this through a nonviolent and peaceful effort. Same thing with Martin Luther King. And, of course, I grew up in the South during that era and was involved with those events. And I think that, we have to learn that the way to make this happen is to come together as a people, know that there is this threat out there, and have our eyes wide open, but then go ahead and create our own community of peace, our community of contact, attempt to come together and bring these technologies out, even though there are great forces that would like us not to, and start anew our civilization. It isn't going to happen, I think. Now, it doesn't mean that, in my case, if I get invited to a meeting with a lot of people, some of whom are really, quite frankly, sociopathic leaders or people, and my view of it is that I view every person as someone who is educable. I go there without prejudice. And I've been surprised. There have been some people that I would have assumed would have been dead set against everything that we're advocating who are actually very supportive. And then vice versa, people that would appear to be very progressive and open-minded who are actually fronting for a cabal, and they just put that on as a mask. So, you really kind of have to take each individual as they really are. But I think that the real way to do it is to do what we're doing through the Global CE5 initiative, disclosure, where, when we first launched the Disclosure Project and the Worldwide Disclosure Movement 13 years ago, what was interesting about that is that almost over 800 million people around the world heard about it. It was on every network in the world. Now, the big corporate titans that are tied to the intelligence community took it down, but people learned. And now if you go all over the world, the majority of people around the world believe we're not alone in the universe and are being visited. In fact, the last year a poll came out, 43% of Americans think that we are currently being visited, but a majority of Americans think we have been visited by intelligent life. So, in a sense, we've accomplished that. The question becomes, how do you organize into some constructive effort? And that's where this whole concept of what we call citizens diplomacy, where each individual says, okay, I can become, as it were, an ambassador from planet Earth to these civilizations with an understanding of what we might have in common. And the biggest thing we have in common is that they're conscious and sentient, and so are we. So what is the nature of mind? What is the nature of consciousness? How can that be experienced in a way that becomes increasingly universal and result in not only an operating system, such as our remote viewing and vectoring system, but also an understanding that no matter how different someone might look from us, or how different their evolutionary track may have been, that at the core, the light of the spirit, the light of consciousness that is within that being is the same conscious mind that's within us. That point of, sort of ineffable unity and oneness is the foundation for an entirely new civilization on this planet that can become worthy of being an interplanetary civilization. So that's what we need to manifest and come together to create. And in the process of that, also find the courage to bring out the knowledge and the science and technology so that we get out of the 1800s. I mean, let's face it, almost everything that we're using, from electromagnetic waves to car engines to trains to whatever it is, are from the 1800s. Maybe jet engines that we use are from the 1930s, and rockets from the 1940s. So basically, for the last 70 to 100 years, our civilization, notwithstanding all the ballyhoo about Silicon Valley, has been arrested in its technological development at a very deep and profound level. And that's a problem, because in the consequence of that is that we have half the world's population living in poverty, and at the same time, we're destroying the biosphere that we all depend on and that our children's generations beyond us are going to depend on. So I think, these are the big challenges that face us, as opposed to endless, fear-mongering and sort of ruminations about who we need to be afraid of next. I think really who we need is like, what was that? The man in the mirror. You look in the mirror. Who you need to be afraid of is right here. It's us. And I think we have to sort of overcome our own fears and sort of embrace our higher nature and our higher angels, fully aware that we're all fallible and none of us are perfect, least of all me. But I think that we have to say, look, we can come together and do better than this. And I think that the mistake most people make is thinking that somehow this is going to be done by edict out of the White House or the United Nations or some other place, or that it's going to be something that is going to happen from the top down. All big evolutionary leaps in human history have come from the ground up, from us the people, we the people.
Absolutely, no doubt about it. Let's go all the way to the UK. Let's get Johnny Webb, our special correspondent, having his eyes and ears to the ground over there, giving Third Phase Moon exclusive report from the United Kingdom UFO sightings, stories. Johnny Webb, any questions for Dr. Greer? Welcome to the show.
Good evening, Blake, Dr. J, and everyone else. Dr. Greer, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi there. I'd like to go back on a few points you spoke about in the first hour, which was our TBR3 sightings, which was the original Belgium disclosure for their military. They were one of the first Europeans to disclose their UFO cases, and they used this Belgium, what I call a TBR3 from the typical look of it. We see them over Scotland and Paris. There's a very famous sighting on YouTube in Paris of that. And my question to you is were you suggesting that these vehicles, these craft, are not actually alien, but they're ours? Not necessarily ours as in like the general public, but as in a secret program?
You have to take it on a case-by-case basis. So let me tell you how this works. If an event starts happening that is a certain number of people seeing an extraterrestrial object, let's say when General de Brouwer, the Belgian Air Force, told us, and actually the Air Force loaned to us some really great night scopes when we went over there during that event to see this going on ourselves. They had NATO radar stations and F-16s that were tracking an object that was going thousands of miles per hour straight up against gravity. But they also had eyewitnesses from their gendarme of an object that was over a little town that was this massive sort of tetrahedral shape. At the bottom end of it looked triangular, but very, very low. And it actually did not move off in a linear way. It collapsed into space, into a throbbing orange-red sphere that was trans-dimensional and translucent, and then went straight out into space that way. So there are there platforms, let's call them, that are man-made electromagnetogravitic, anti-gravity is the pop culture term, but it's really EMG, electromagnetogravitic systems that could be triangular or dish-shaped, that could fool a casual observer. Well, in that sense, yes, of course. Now, what we have found is that often when there's a series of sightings or events that are ET in nature, classified programs will send in a man-made one just to confuse the picture or control the narrative. So it isn't, things get piggybacked on top of each other. So everyone wants to say it was either this or it's that, but sometimes it's a mix of both, because the obfuscation is the name of the game in the intelligence community. And years ago, there was a National Security Agency director named General Odom, O-D-O-M, you can Google him, and his right-hand guy was someone I got to know who used to carry his briefcase and was all the meetings. And he's actually the guy who looked at the Marilyn Monroe document I have from the early 60s about Marilyn Monroe, basically. It was basically her death warrant because she was going to disclose stuff that Kennedy had told her about the ET issue, but that's another story. The point I'm making is that this gentleman told me that they had something called DDT, and I said, well, yeah, that's this toxic, pesticide, whatever. And he said, no, not that. We call it, we set up a decoy. It creates a distraction from the actual events, and then we trash the whole subject through doing that. So they can do that with documents. They can do that with aircraft sighting that are man-made, that can masquerade or hide some ET activity that's going on. They can do this, and it's called a DDT operation. And when you explain this to me, and that it's that's sort of a template or a sort of a theme that goes through a number of famous UFO cases where it's this, and then it becomes and it morphs to something else. And what happens is that it's not that they're not on top of these things. They certainly know if it's beginning to break out into the media. And so there could be a situation where there are genuine ET events happening, and then they'll do something that will make people think, well, this was a man-made event or an experimental aircraft. And people say, well, it wasn't that, it's this, when in reality, both things had happened. Now, a great example of that, although it's a more primitive one, was the original Roswell thing, where, of course, this event happened, and then they said, well, look, here, we're going to drag out the remains of this weather balloon. The same thing happened when I was in Phoenix in 1997 during the Phoenix Lights events, one of the biggest mass witnessed events. That, by the way, was the CE-5. I had some people there, and we were doing a CE-5 vector, and I was asking the ETs to do something that would be so amazing that it would make its way into the news, and we could get footage, because I was doing a closed briefing for a whole bunch of members of Congress a couple of weeks later in April, early April. So what happened, this story kind of made strange credulity for people to hear it, but once that was happening, of course, it was seen in a huge area by thousands of people. Even Governor Fife Simonson has eventually come clean that he ridiculed it when he had actually seen it and knew that it was amazing. But after that, they sent up aircraft. They dropped a whole bunch of flares. They had them floating down. There are flares that will do this, and you can put them out in a pattern. And they said, well, that's what people were seeing. We were just doing that a little earlier. So this kind of a program that's designed to confuse the public is done with great regularity. And I think that's why people get into these slugfests that, oh, it was this, no, it was that, and often it was both. And I think there has to be sort of a deepening of awareness of how often that has happened in cases that are getting out of the control. As one guy who was tied into these majestic programs said to me back in the early 90s, he said, look, it's hidden in plain sight. But as soon as it starts coming out like that, we just have to do a lot of stuff to divert people's attention, and they employ this DDT strategy. And I liken this to, there's these gold nuggets of actual amazing transdimensional ET events, and then they'll come in, these intelligence operatives, and they'll dump a mountain of fool's gold on top of it. And unfortunately, people aren't doing enough of an assay. They're not testing, is this gold or is it fool's gold? Is it real or is it Memorex, as the old commercial used to say? So I think that's one of the tasks that we have to undertake when all these things begin to happen is to understand that there's a multiplicity of phenomenon that usually get called one thing. And we have to begin to realize that it's a little more involved than that, particularly since you're dealing with something where this is the biggest secret in the history of modern society. I mean, if you take the Wilbur Smith document, that's been an authenticated top-secret document from Canada from 1951, where it states that we're studying the modus operandi of these things that were retrieved, and that this is the biggest secret in the history of the United States, transcending the secrecy of the development of the hydrogen bomb. I'm almost quoting from this document. Now, people, when they read that, they have to think for a minute. This was a year before we detonated the first hydrogen bomb. So for the efforts attached to the subject to be more secret than the ultimate doomsday weapon, and we're talking now UFOs, that is an astonishing statement. But you have to then connect that to the fact that they were studying the modus operandi, the mechanism of action of these vehicles, and that a senior scientist at the Naval Research Labs that I've known for many years in Washington, it's the largest defense lab in the United States, told me that he was in quote, the vault, and it is what it's called, and saw a document that in October 1954, before I was born, they had mastered what's called gravity control. So from 1954 up to the early 60s, they began to develop various types of these aircraft. Now, some people have felt that Werner von Braun, Hermann Oberth, and others had knowledge of some of the things that Adolf Hitler was working on all the way back to World War II and the Nazi era, that his secret weapon was actually these high-voltage electromagnetic anti-gravity platforms, whereas our secret weapon was the atomic bomb. And I would not disagree with that. I think there's some good evidence that, in fact, going back to the 40s, there were experiments done with this, but that it really had not gotten perfected by the end of World War II, but that a lot of that information began to then be complemented by the studying of extraterrestrial vehicles that we had downed using electromagnetic scalar weapons back in the late 40s up to the current era, and that potentiated the research and development greatly between 1947 and 1954. So that by the mid-50s onward, there were a number of things that were seen and have been seen that are actually man-made, which the layperson could easily confuse to be an extraterrestrial vehicle. And this is why the whole history and the study of this is really necessary to be able to make any kind of decision on any given case that gets reported. And a lot of times, as I said earlier, a case will be reported. There's just simply not enough information and data from people who were there to know whether it was ours, another civilization's, or what.
Dr. Greer, a while back, a few years ago, I was discussing with a friend why they're hiding this knowledge from us of these extraterrestrials. And he told me that it's not necessarily about we're afraid of them or we can't handle the truth, but more so because of the technology. And you proved that in the movie Sirius. And
right.
It came down to the six sisters, if I'm not mistaken, the six pillars of the corporations that control every single thing on Earth. How can we dethrone them?
Well, that's what I just said. I mean, we need to create another system and make that a redundant and irrelevant system. Now, I know that's a rather outrageous thing for some people to say, to do, but that is how you do it. You simply replace something corrupt with something new that isn't. You don't get sucked into this black hole of that corrupt system. Now, some people would argue that, unfortunately, I've spent a lot of time interfacing with people in that system, going and briefing people like the CIA director and the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency and going to these kind of meetings. But I've done that from the point of view that, surprisingly, a large number of senior military and intelligence officials are on our side of this argument. But, they're certainly not, they don't have the power to take on the really nasty characters who want to continue to keep this secret. I mean, don't forget that for the former CIA director, Bill Colby, was going to hand off to my group an operational zero-point energy generator and around $50 million so that it could be disclosed properly to the world, and the first generation of this brought out back in the mid-1990s. And the week he was going to meet with a member of my board, they found him coincidentally floating down the Potomac River dead. Now, this brings up the question of, what really happened to CIA Director Bill Colby. He was retired. He was getting up in years. A very good friend of his best friend, knew a member of my board of directors and said, look, he really thinks you're right. It's time for this to come out. But here we are almost 20 years later, and they kind of made a very nasty example of Bill Colby. And I think that what most people don't understand is that there are really a lot of people in that system who don't agree with the agenda, but if they stick their heads up too far out of their rat holes, frankly, they just chop their heads off. So it's a very difficult situation. So what I have concluded and learned the very, very, very hard way, tragically, is that we have just got to do it ourselves. And, if others join in at some point along that path, whether it be peaceful contact or bringing out the science and technologies or, fundamentally disclosing in a way that's not xenophobic and terrifying to the public, the fact that we're not alone in the universe, those are all things that we as human beings should endeavor to do for one another in a compassionate way. And I think that as we do that, there will be people who will throw their hat in the ring. Like eventually Governor Fife Simonton did throw his hat in the ring and said, look, and by the way, President Obama's the senior advisor to the President of the United States, a guy named John Podesta, who came out publicly after we did the Disclosure Project in favor of disclosure. He had been chief of staff for, of course, the President Bill Clinton, and then but when we did the Disclosure Project and launched the worldwide movement for disclosure in 2001, he actually came out saying that the secrecy on this should be ended, that there should be disclosure of this information, et cetera. So there are people in all walks of life who feel this way. Now, how far they're willing to stick their necks out, that's a very, very personal decision. And, having gone through what I and others who've worked closely with me have gone through, I don't blame anyone for keeping their heads down and wanting someone else to do it. But I think ultimately that's why it's important that lots of people do it. It isn't up to me or any other person. It's really a whole bunch of people have to say, all right, it's time to make a change. And when we begin to move in that direction, it creates its own morphogenic field that alters the timeline and alters space-time, creates a new reality.
Sadly, we seem to be losing the fight, though. I know we need to create a new system, but these people that are in control, I mean, obviously, we are better off now than we were 50, 60 years ago, because now we're able to disseminate information that we weren't able 2 years ago. The big media control things, now things we have places like this which can get to millions of people, and
right.
and that's, I think, what's helping us and the educating the people. But again, it just seems like they're still in that control. And
yeah, of course. I mean, and here's the thing: and usually, if you look at what's called phase transition in quantum mechanics and quantum theory, once you reach a critical mass, as you approach that critical mass, whatever it is, things become very chaotic, things become very messy, and then suddenly there's coherence. If you look at superfluidity in helium, for example, once you cool the helium down to approaching absolute zero, it becomes very roiling and boiling and chaotic. But then once a certain percentage, around 1% of those molecules of atoms of helium become coherent, there's what's called a phase transition that happens very quickly. So that is the pattern. Things get chaotic and crazy, and then there's a breakthrough. So I think you can focus on whatever you want to focus on, and I don't think this is not to say one should be Pollyannish at all about the state of the world and the craziness that's going on. It's only to say that that's one reality to be aware of. There's another reality going on, and that's the growing knowledge and coherence of communities and growing numbers of people who understand higher consciousness, non-locality of mind, non-locality of space-time, trans-dimensional realities, the fact that we're not alone, beginning to learn about these sciences and technologies, and all of that coming together. Yet it may seem awfully slow, but it can reach a certain point, and then it tilts. Okay, and there's a tilting point. So I think we have to focus on that process, because ultimately, it's just too depressing. There's not a lot we can do about the fact that the fundamental foundations of our society are lamentably defective and are so corrupt that they're very likely to collapse under their own weight. However, that does not prevent us from starting and creating something new out of it, sort of phoenix-like, out of that chaos. And the world, yes, on one level is sinking further into both social, cultural, and geophysical chaos. On the other hand, we can be doing something proactive and constructive that ultimately can take another path. And so that's really all anyone can aspire to do. And I think that's why I left my medical career to do this, is that I saw that this was, I often joke that I know an emergency when I see one, and the world is in a global emergency on many levels, and we need to come together and do something constructive. And it doesn't take half the world's population to get this, but it does take a critical mass, and that's what we have to continue to do through education and bringing people together and creating, positive change.
Dr. Greer, this is John in London. I just wanted to ask you, what do you know about holographic UFOs and things like this?
Oh, yeah, well, of course. I mean, if you understand, recently they had this really creepy dance of, I think it was Michael Jackson at some awards ceremony, where it really looked like him on the stage, even though he's been dead for years. And the technology certainly exists. If you take, that's a commercial patented company that did that, and you can Google that if you want. People who haven't seen it, it's really quite persuasive. Certainly that could be done to hoax an event, and that's something that you always have to keep in mind also. And whatever it is that's being acknowledged within the current technology and state-of-the-art journals, if you take that times 10, times 100, that's how sophisticated it is within these deep classified programs. And because remember, technology advances very, very quickly. Within once you have a critical mass is reached, and everything begins to go forward, and it picks up momentum. It's a snowball effect. And so, by the way, I have someone who's been connected to the aerospace and intelligence community for much of his career, who's told me that the current name for this MJ group, Magic Group, Majestic Majesty, as it's been called, is currently something called the SIG Panel Group, SIG Panel Group. And, so that's one of the compartmented operations. So, and those kind of entities, they have so much money and they have so much technology that certainly they can simulate and hoax holographically in the sky or elsewhere. But it doesn't mean that everything that goes bump in the night is the same thing. And this is where I was mentioning earlier about having a differential diagnosis for various UFO phenomenon. There's a whole bunch of phenomena, plural, not one phenomenon. And until we understand that, it's going to be very easy to trick people. And I think this is, and we have to stay ahead of that curve because technology is not standing still. Now, if you go back and you look at some of the paintings that are from the Middle Ages and ancient art civilizations, you can see things that look just like modern UFOs with these blue beams of light. There's an incredible picture it's in Sirius, our film, that's authenticated picture of the Virgin Mary holding, I think, Christ, and behind her shoulder, left shoulder, is this classic UFO with a beam of light coming out the underside, illuminating people in the background who have their arms up to it, making contact. And that's from, I think it's from the 1400s, if I remember correctly. So I think that, we can't throw everything away that's happening as a deception. On the other hand, there are a lot of, by the way, the term in the intelligence community is a deceptive INW, a deceptive indication and warning, or a false INW, false indication and warning, which is what the pop culture calls a false flag operation. So these deceptive INWs are certainly out there, and we have to be aware of them. But we also can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are some amazing real contact events happening. We just have to be aware that it's just a maturing of our understanding that needs to happen.
Laura? Our producer, Laura Lee Solomon, has a question for you. If she can unmute. Go ahead, Laura.
Yes, I do. I saw on your website that you do a lot with working towards free energy devices, and you just mentioned Mr. Colby, but I've seen some things within the last few days that indicated they are actually building free energy devices in Taiwan. Do you know anything about this?
Well, we've heard about this, and what we've asked is, as you know, we launched a $100,000 prize and a award to anyone who can bring an operational device that meets the criteria. This is on our website. What I have unfortunately found is that when we tried to do this in the past, people haven't had something that is actually a self-running system. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't exist out there, but it has to be established and proven. So short of us being able to build a research and development laboratory and do that from what we have already, which is a lot of information and technology knowledge, if someone has something like that operating, it ought to be able to do a couple things. First, it ought to be able to carry a load, meaning a kilowatt, a few kilowatts, while it runs itself. In other words, if there's a power-up system of batteries or what have you, it should keep those charged while it's running. If it's really pulling energy out of the 0 point or quantum vacuum flux field, electromagnetic field, it should be able to do that. So we've set up our criteria that if anyone has something like that, and I understand people are trying to put out open source devices like that, and we've gotten hundreds, maybe thousands of emails about this. We'd say that's wonderful, but please bring it to us so that we can evaluate it and reproduce it and prove it, because it doesn't really do a lot of good if it's just a video on YouTube. What it needs to do is if we could have one of these devices, the people we could put it in front of, I mean, within a few days, I'm not going to belabor my bona fides here, but believe me when I tell you, it wouldn't be just something on YouTube being looked at. But it has to go through a scientific verification, reproducibility, independent evaluation. If it can't do that, then it's sort of apocryphal. I mean, and this is not at all to say that they don't exist. I know they have existed. But what we're asking for is that if anyone has the knowledge to do that, please contact us and bring it here so that we can take it to the next step. Because I know that there are very good people. Not everyone who is in and out of government or who have a lot of assets are wanting to keep something like this secret. They would like to see something like this that's verified and get behind it. And I was up in New York a couple of months ago giving a talk at a foundation with this a gentleman who's he's raised $500 or $600 million. It's not related to this subject. But ultimately, all those folks want to say, is there any operating system that can be put in front of some folks so we can get behind it? And these are people who want to do it. Now, unfortunately, most of those same people don't want to do any kind of support and funding for something until they see a proof of principle prototype. So what you're saying, and I hear you, and I've certainly heard about it, would be wonderful news if we can get it and evaluate it, test it, and reproduce it. Why is that important? There are people who've been able to be able to make one of these things to work, but they don't know quite what they did to get there, and it isn't reproducible. So unless the sine qua non of science is independent verification and reproducibility, that's what science is. It ought to be able to be reproducible. So that's what we're waiting to see, and we encourage anyone who has an operating system like that to get hold of us and to be able to bring it here so we can evaluate it.
Now, Dr. Greer, you have the STAR Challenge.
That's what I just referred to. Yeah.
Just for that, exactly. And you're actually giving away a prize for this, right?
Yes, it's a $100,000 prize for someone who will bring that and have it open source and allow it to be independently verified and have us be able to reproduce it independently. So, we have the ability to do that. And unfortunately, when we've reached out to some of these things that are on YouTube and said, well, that's great, if they claim it costs $5,000 or $6,000 or $7,000, I said, make another copy of it. It usually costs less to make a second copy than the first one that you've invented, and get it so that we can bring it so we can evaluate it. And ultimately, they'll say, no, we're not interested in that. Well, this is worrisome to me. Why wouldn't someone want to do that? If it costs you $5,000 or even $10,000 to make one, if you actually have perfected the science, and you can get $100,000 for delivering one to us, why wouldn't you do that? It's a 10-to-1 return on your cost. So that's what we're asking people to do, and it is a sort of, it is a challenge, and it's an award. It's both a challenge and an award that we have, that Serious Technology Advanced Research has. And that's what we want to do, because we have not been able to raise the funds to actually open a research and development laboratory, but we do have enough funds to do that. So, if someone has something like that, please tell them to get hold of us and bring it here, yeah.
And they can get a hold of you, of course, at SeriousDisclosure.com, as well as signing up for the special retreat at Joshua Tree, and in general for information for the Contact in the Desert and the amazing night of August 10th, where the global contact will be occurring. I was present last year, and it was an amazing event. And Dr. Greer, I am sure this year is going to be even more amazing. We have about 13 minutes left, and I wanted to give this last time to speak about anything you want to speak about. We have so many things that are important to us. Obviously, you have something in your possession that could change the world, the Atacama humanoid. Obviously, you are educating people through the Serious Disclosure, the movie, and of course, you've been in touch with high-ranked people, like you've given briefings to CIA and of admirals and other people. What do you think is the most important message we can be giving the listeners and the viewers of this right now?
Well, you touched on this Atacama humanoid, and I just want to clarify that I don't have possession of it. It's in an institute in Spain. I did hear from the gentleman who heads that institute this week, and one of the things that they have found from other studies, independent from ours, is that this little 6-inch tall creature, humanoid, did walk, and in fact the tissue on the soles of the feet showed that it did walk, which comports with what Dr. Lockman at Stanford said when he said that this, from the study of the epiphyseal plates, the growth plates that are in the long bones, that this is a 6 to 8 year old creature. But of course, humans aren't 6 inches tall at 6 to 8 years of age. What's interesting also is that the Amara Indian, native people of Chile, native South American tribe, have long-standing traditions of these small humanoid life forms that they lived in peacefully coexisted with for centuries. And that is very much in the tradition of the native peoples of Chile. And we just also recently got from the Chilean government some new pictures that they had released of these luminous amazing pictures of UFOs over Chile, some of them up in that area, the remote desert areas of northern Chile, and which is where this particular Atacama humanoid was found. We call it the Atacama humanoid because it was found in the Atacama Desert. So, research is still going apace with that. And I would say that one of the thing that everyone can do, and more than any one piece of evidence, of which there are thousands that we've developed over the years, or radar case, or photograph, or what have you, is the fact that within ourselves, within the nature of our own awareness, we have the ability to become a universal being, where we can actually experience any point in space and time through the deep aspects of consciousness that are within everybody. And it's not that you have to be, there was a friend of mine back years ago named Ingo Swann, who was a great remote viewer. You don't have to be Ingo Swann. Every single human being that's awake can become aware of awareness and go into states of awareness where they can then see and make contact with these other civilizations and become an ambassador of peace from humans to their people and to their civilizations. And I think that is the most exciting thing, because there's a training app that you can download. There's a link to it from our website, SiriusDisclosure.com, and it actually will turn your smartphone into a magnetic field detector, so that if a craft is approaching, it'll actually signal, even if it's not visible with the naked eye. It's really a cool app. And so what I tell people is that, if you can't come to Joshua Tree and be with us on Sunday, the August 10th, you can do that and be with us in spirit and in consciousness, because really at that level of consciousness, when you go into deep meditation and deep silence, there is no boundary in space. You can be anywhere you intend to be. And so that's the power of what's folded within us. There's a wonderful, I think it's a Sufi saying that says, it's a rhetorical question, and it says, thinkest thyself a puny form when within thee the universe is folded. Literally, the entirety of the cosmos is folded in its entirety like a quantum conscious hologram inside every single one of us. And the real adventure, this is an adventure in outer space, but it starts, in my knowledge, in inner space. And all the native peoples throughout time have known that. That's why I think what we're doing as we sit in a circle out under the stars, doing what we're going to be doing at Joshua Tree, has been done for millennia by people who've had contact with star people. And I think that's really what we want to do, but on a scale, now that we have the kind of communications that you refer to in these kind of shows, is that we can do this as a global community, and the effect that can have in shifting the course of where our planet is headed is really more profound than we can even imagine.
As you mentioned earlier, and of course, as I talked about us being a primitive species in the sense that we're having this tribal warfare, so many millions of people killed, we have corruption going on, we have famine, we have disease. Why haven't these ETs come and help us? Obviously, in the ancient past, they've been there. They've given wisdom to the people. All the ancient cultures talk about that. But why are they letting us die like this?
Well, they're not, actually, and this is why what we're finding with our contact teams around the world, people are having direct contact. They're getting beautiful messages. They're having all kinds of experiences. But that's very different from them landing on the White House lawn and knocking the president upside the head and say, hey, snap out of it and do something. That's not the way this happens. And I think it's more subtle than that. And I think a big part of it is that if we were to go to a worst-case scenario of an environmental collapse or a thermonuclear war, I predict that you would see a massive intervention. However, barring that kind of thing, something really amazingly terrible, an earth change event, a polar shift, or what have you, they're really expecting us to learn how to grow up, become conscious, and make these changes ourselves. Why? Because if it's done for us by an outside entity, well, that would be about as successful as us trying to impose Jeffersonian democracy in Iraq. That worked out great, didn't it? So that isn't how cultures and societies evolve. They have got to know and want it themselves, and it has to come from within each of us and then collectively and we have to make that change. You know, obviously these civilizations have such enormous technology, power, consciousess related technology that we haven't talked about that. I have whole chapters in my books I've written about technology-assisted consciousness and consciousness-assisting technology and the interface between mind and thought and electromagnetic devices that are transdimensional. Obviously, they have all this. We understand it. They have it fully operational. But they also know that we have free will, and we have to be able to learn in a way by coming together and making this change. And I think that's where there's sort of a cosmic codependency that develops, where people think the ETs are going to solve all our problems for us, or they're the cause of all our problems. There's this sort of weird codependency instead of owning our own stuff and making the change happen ourselves.
You know, again, we got about 5 minutes left, and we have so many different things that we could talk about, and I wanted to give you the time to speak about whatever you wanted to give the message to everybody else. Like I said earlier, Reagan's speech, one thing he mentioned, of course, is that once we all come, if we had an alien invasion, wouldn't we all come together and realize that we're not so different after all? And like you said, we have to come to that oneness ourselves. But it seems like it's coming at a slower pace. We are reaching people, and you've done an amazing job creating ambassadors who are actually having contact for themselves. But what's the tipping point? How many people do we have to get to the contact so we can actually start to really improve to that level? Because it seems to me a lot of people are still asleep, Dr. Greer.
Well, they are, but I think that, I can't give you a quantitative number. I can tell you the effect. In other words, when enough people begin to do the right thing with this issue instead of frivolity and sensationalism and nonsense, what you're going to find is that things will change very quickly. And all we can do, each individual, is to find like-minded people to gather together to do that. And that's why the thing that was the initiating project that I got involved with, that I founded in 1990, was the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, whose main purpose was by using these concepts of non-locality, of trans-dimensional technology and consciousness interfacing, of higher states of consciousness, of people becoming these points of change, because an individual who is in that state of awareness can have an effect that is enormous. But when there are, say, 10 people or 1,000 people, and let's hope on August 10th maybe we have hundreds of thousands of people doing this with us all over the world, what that can have, the effect that can have on the minds and hearts of people who aren't even aware of this issue, is that it can resonate within that deep field of consciousness and awaken and cause this global awakening. And that is really how deep change happens. And I think people have to, my message to people is they need to view themselves and empower themselves in that way. Because if they believe that they have that ability within themselves, they'll be able to do amazing things. If they don't believe it, they won't be able to. And so they have to have a sense of faith in themselves, that this is something they can do, and that's something. And when they do, the most amazing, seemingly magical things take place. And I've seen this for decades. And really, all of our lives are an example of that. We only achieve the things that we believe we can. I couldn't put a chest tube into a trauma victim unless I really believed I could do it. You could just be there in a state of paralysis. So there's a certain point where you have to say, we all have this power of positive change and deep enlightened consciousness within us, and we can experience it. We don't have to go to guru or something to get. Each of us can develop this higher state of consciousness and this aspect of universal mind ourselves, and then apply it in the world in a way that is for the betterment of everyone. And I think that's how all of us, if we view ourselves that way and then come together in that state, without prejudice and fear and without the usual things that hold humans back, we'll find that things can change very quickly. But we need that critical mass, that sort of phase transition, if you will, quantum mechanic level And I can't give you a number. Is it 1%? Is it a fraction of a percent? I don't think it works that way. I think because the power of consciousness is so great, we just need enough people doing this that it begins to have an effect, and it turns this ship around, this spaceship Earth, I call it, that unfortunately, really, you're correct, has been a bit off kilter for the last 100 years or so. But I think it also can be righted pretty quickly if we come together in the right spirit.
Absolutely, Dr. Greer, and we are near the end of the show. I wanted to tell everyone next week, join us for former Congressman Merrill Cook, who Dr. Greer did testify in front of at the Citizen hearing last year. Don't forget, July 10th or August 10th at Joshua Tree, a very big night. Again, if you cannot be there live, you can go on Serious Disclosure, get the app, and be there in spirit. Maharishi effect. Remember, it is exponential. The more people that meditate, if 100 people meditate, it's the equivalent to maybe 1,000. As you know, Dr. Greer. So we need all those people. Dr. Greer, we got 10 seconds. Any final words?
I just want to thank you for your help and support, and I look forward to seeing all of you in that sort of ethical and philosophical construct. We do these protocols, and it's amazing how often we have these sort of things seen.
Doctor, go ahead, Blake.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. J. The connection between man and alien is quite profound, especially when the kahuna was here in Hawaii. You were over there in California at the Joshua Tree, and the prediction was there. This connection, I think, is global, like you've been saying. But what about, see, we're working on a movie, Dr. Greer, about, it's called Hangar 52, and we're basing it on knowledge that we received from the people in regards to abductions, the sightings, free energy. Is there a government cover-up? Is there a dark force? And we're thinking that is the government controlled by a dark alien race?
No, absolutely not. However, I mean, of course, it makes for a great conspiracy theory, and I think that there's so much information that I think is disinformation out there on this subject. Now, I mean, are there aspects of the government that are incredibly dark? Yes, but why do they need to be controlled by an ET civilization? I mean, it's sort of I think it's the cop-out that people come up with not to take responsibility for our own failings and shortcomings as human beings. And, humans have been doing horrific things and dominating each other and engaging in warfare for way too long. And I just think it's a bridge too far to say that, oh, this is because there's some force. Now, you can define perhaps evil as this kind of behavior, and if you want to look at it that way, but to say that it's extraterrestrial is, I think, really, there's no basis for that at all. However, I think there are people, ironically, within the government programs who want people to believe that, because there's no way to, how do you prop up a multi-trillion-dollar military-industrial complex worldwide? And we're spending $1 trillion in the United States alone, if you all in with intelligence programs, Homeland Security, black budgets, the Pentagon. How do you keep that kind of spending afoot if you don't somehow concoct a bigger enemy than, say, terrorism? And Leon Panetta, who I put a briefing together for him when he was the CIA director for Obama, his first CIA director, and he at one point he said, look, we're spending over $100 billion a year chasing 70 Al Qaeda members in the desert of Pakistan and Afghanistan. And how do you grow this sort of juggernaut and justify this kind of expenditure, which is of course impoverishing the world tremendously, without having a new enemy? And this is what Carol Rosin and Werner von Braun, the guy who invented the rocket for Adolf Hitler, told Carol Rosin on his deathbed that basically that they were absolutely concocting events and trying to brainwash the public that there would be a threat from outer space, even if it's only one or two species that we should then unite against, like the movie Independence Day, so we can, quote, kick alien butt, quoting Will Smith in that movie. And, I've spoken to too many people in the intelligence community, as well as Hollywood, who know that that's the agenda. But unfortunately, the UFO and New Age subculture have taken this stuff hook, line, and sinker. And in my sense, it's a tragedy of brainwashing.
I wanted to ask you also, with Hangar 52, we are trying to showcase the good side of humanity. And like you said, there is a dark and evil side of it as well. And there's an equal point in the middle. And I guess that's the way it's going to go on forever. But we are trying to put a good light on things. But we also want to delve into, in the movie Majestic 12. Dr. Greer, does it exist?
Well, I mean, it's had various names since the 40s, and, does that name still be the one? Would that still be the one that's current? I seriously doubt it. Was there a group, really it's Majesty and Magic in some documents I have that are as recent as the 90s and the 2000s? Yes, it has existed, and basically it's a committee, not just American, that has maintained the secrecy and the counterintelligence programs. Now, the disinformation and counterintelligence programs is a big part of it. And the people that I've met with over the years, and I have over 550 people who worked in classified projects have dealt with this subject. And if you go to our website, we have several dozen that are actually on videotape talking. But for every one that's on our website, there are at least 10 that won't go onto an interview that I personally have met with. And what you find as you put this mosaic together is it's a whole complex picture you have to put together carefully, is that so much of the information on this subject has been, quote-unquote, leaked by the intelligence community, but it's really pre-positioned disinformation that's designed to have a certain effect. One effect is to discredit the subject because it's just so ridiculous. The other, however, is actually to manipulate people with fear. And if you look at it, if you look at how demagogues, whether it's been religious leaders or political leaders or different kinds of entities over the last several thousand years of human history, is that one of the chief ways that humans have been able to be manipulated is to make them afraid of something that's, quote, other. So, for many years, it was one, race or one ethnic group. It's still today all over the world. Look at the Middle East, one religious group against another. It may be one ethnic group. If you go to Africa, there are tribal groups. And, Rwanda, you had the Tutsis and the Hutus. Some like 800,000 people were butchered, a decade or two ago. And what you see with that is that there's a tendency for people to hate and be afraid of anything that's really different from them. And even if it's not very different. I mean, look, for years in Ireland, you had Protestants and Catholics. Okay, here, they're all Christian. They're white. They're living on this little island, and they're blowing each other up like there's no tomorrow. So the problem with that is that people who are trying to get a lot of aren't very well funded and extremely sophisticated in the technologies they have. It's just a wrong idea. They are well funded, albeit illegally, and they are very sophisticated in the technologies they have, and also in the ability they have to stage something and fool people. So I think you have to view so much of this with an eye of, it's sort of like, is it real or Memorex? The old commercial years ago about the audio tapes. Is it actually an ET event, or is it something masquerading as ET or alien for the purpose of psychological warfare, like the Benowitz case that everyone probably knows about, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations case back in the day in the near Sandia National Laboratories in Kirkland Air Force Base, where they really did stage not only a human abduction, but a whole series of things and documents to put people off the course. Now, what a lot of people don't know is what they were really trying to hide, aside from putting out the false information, is that there was a woman that Paul Benowitz knew that had actually seen near Kirkland and Sandia a man-made anti-gravity propulsion device that looks like a UFO. And in order to sort of brainwash her into thinking that was not ours but alien, they set up this whole series of things that Richard Doty and others were involved in. And I think that this is a real problem because, you can't take things at face value, and when you do, you're going to find that you're just being played by some very sophisticated people who have a lot of experience manipulating mass markets and mass media and subcultures into a certain type of reactive or reactionary perspective. And I'd say, well, you can never prove a negative. So you can never prove that there are no civilizations out there that may not have our best interest at heart. But let's say even if that were true, what's your response going to be? Is your response going to be more war, i.e. Star Wars, interplanetary systems that are going into war? Well, if you understand technologies that are these scalar electromagnetic weapon systems, you can take out an entire planet with a system like that. So if hydrogen bombs and atomic bombs would leave the world uninhabitable, these systems are even worse than that. So there is only one path forward, and it's peace. And it's not as exciting as a horror film about aliens. It's not as titillating about finding a new group of people. You can't overtly be a racist, and you can't overtly hate women, or you can't. Now they're wanting to find a way that people can overtly hate something. Well, what's the next something? Well, it's another system out there, another star system that we have to hate. It's a very convenient thing. It's tragic, but it plays into this sort of collective experience of humanity in our recorded history of ethnic groups, religious groups, political groups going to battle, going to war. And you look at the last 100 years, we've killed something like 200 million of our own species in warfare on this planet, and often for things that are just ridiculous. And yet that's something that is, unfortunately, one of the chief organizing principles of the current world order is...
Now, let's get Dr. Greer on. We're actually calling him live.
That's
air.
Right. I like this live real-time action.
Dr. Stephen Greer. Dr. Greer, welcome to the show. Third Phase of Moon Radio.
Welcome to the show, Dr. Greer. This is Blake Cousins, and it's always good to have you back on Third Phase of Moon. The viewers are fascinated by your knowledge, the Atacama alien, this contact in the desert. We're almost up to giving $5,000 of free tickets to the show, thanks to you, and everybody's excited to show up at the Joshua Tree. I know last year's event was quite incredible. There was a person right here in Hawaii named Reynolds Kamaka Vivioli. He's a kahuna. He claims he has contact with the Star family, and he predicted that night there would be a major triangle formation that was going to show up over the Joshua Tree. And we put it out on Third Phase, and people claim that it really did show up the night you were there. Did you witness the triangle UFO, Dr. Greer?
Yeah, we did. And in fact, it's interesting. We did a similar thing in Arizona a few years earlier, and a very beautiful tetrahedral craft partially materialized. We got a photograph of it. I believe it's on our website, SiriusDisclosure.com, under the heading. If you go to, there's ET evidence, and then there's also CE5. But we have, a number of images. I'm pretty sure that one is up there. Certainly, it's in our collection. And what happened is that there was a couple hundred people out under the stars on this roof kind of terrace, and this same object, which is very, in two dimensions, it would look like a triangle, but you could actually see that it was turned, so you could see that it was a tetrahedron, which, by the way, for those of you who don't know, a tetrahedron is four triangles. It's an equilateral triangle on each of three sides, and they make a triangular base. But, of course, if you don't have an up and down coordinate, it's just basically four triangular sides. And these shaped craft have been seen, of course, for, I think, millennia. But we have had that happen. And sometimes they will be fully in this dimension, invisible. Sometimes they'll only be visible with a good night scope. And other times you'll only see part of it. You'll see an edge of it. In fact, when we were in, where were we? Also in Arizona a couple months ago, we had one of these appear, but what you saw of it was like 2 points of light that were moving together, and as it moved, or area around it blocked out the other stars. And so the only part of it that could be see with the naked eye were these 2 points of light, but very large, moving right over the sky above us. And we actually had some amazing video of this type of event happening during these contact events. And just so people know, a CE5 is when humans set up the conditions and invite contact, as opposed to something that's an accidental sighting or what have you. So it's sort of a diplomatic initiative where we are welcoming them here within the aspect of the oneness that's within us, which is consciousness and universality of mind, and that we think is the foundation for a future of universal peace. So centralized power. Know that they can do that if they can set the populace against each other and play them off each other. And, there was an amazing book written some years ago about how in New Zealand, the colonialists turned one peaceful native tribe against another so that they would enter into warfare, so that they would be weakened, so the colonialists could then dominate the entire area. And that kind of Machiavellian, very deceptive action is really what goes on. What's unfortunate is that the UFO subculture has become the chief vector or vehicle, you might look at it, for a lot of this terrifying information to come out, so that there'll be people in a camp of, there are good ones and there are bad ones, and we're going to choose sides, and it's Star Wars all over again. I mean, this is like, a wet dream, I hate to say that, for the intelligence community to have people, brainwashed this way. And what I think that, when I met years ago, I got a document. It's in the film very briefly, Sirius, which you can see at our website, SIRIUS is the name of the film, and it came out last year as the biggest crowdfunded film in history. And what happened is, in this document, although they didn't spend much time on it in the movie, I would have liked to spend more time, is that it was from the Strategic Studies Institute, and it was talking, this is 1996, about creating a global abduction cult and to simulate human being abducted by aliens that would be done with very advanced aircraft and the stagecraft of creatures that look like aliens but aren't. And, this document is in black and white, and it's an authentic document describing this program. Now, if that's all there was, I'd say, well, that's interesting. But then I've met with so many men and women who've been in these projects. I remember talking to a man who had been in a program back in the 70s. It was the late 60s and 70s where they were doing this. And he says, oh, yeah, back then we didn't have as good a stagecraft, as they called it, as we do now. But we were able to get these anti-gravity devices and have people appear to be aliens. And they would use various chemical substances, electromagnetic weapons, and they would engage in various types of abductions and also mutilation events back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and for livestock. And he says we were doing that because we knew that that would make its way into the tabloid media and the UFO subculture and begin to start this slowly snowballing effect of fearing everything alien. So that's sort of how the game is played. It's been played for thousands of years by despotic demagogues, whether they be religious figures or political figures. And there's always an agenda behind it. The agenda behind it is to manipulate people through fear. And I think that, one of the big challenges of this era right now is for people to transcend and see through that. And it's like the old Who song, we won't be fooled again. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people have been fooled. And the idea that these programs